welcome everyone to our technical sources webinar. Today we are building on what Janelle talked about last week, and um, everybody talked about last week, actually, not just Janelle. But today we're going to be talking more about the encoding side rather than the editorial side. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen, Songhees, and Esquimalt peoples on whose territory the University of Victoria stands, and the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. For those of you who haven't met me before, hi, I'm Navarra. I use they, them pronouns, and I am LEMDO's project manager and lead trainer right now, and have been for a couple of years. I'm also a big knitter. When I'm not talking at you folks, I usually have a project in my hands because I like to be moving around. And if that is you as well, you like to doodle, fidget, knit, whatever it is, while you're listening to this, please feel free to do so. Today we've got a few things that we're going to go over. We're going to begin off with kind of the broader topic. We're going to talk about how your edition bibliography relates to the shared LEMDO bibliography, which I will usually just call bibl1, which is much faster to say. You're then going to talk about how to create a file, a bibliography file, using a LEMDO template. It's a good skill to have in general, but especially for those bibliography files. You're going to become comfortable with kind of the file structure of your bibliography using the div, the bibl, and the list bibl elements. And then we're going to get a bit more into the nitty-gritty and talk about a few specific elements that you can use to encode a full bibliography entry. Okay, so LEMDO bibliographies. We've got two that you're going to be worrying about, two types of bibliographies that you'll worry about. We have a third, they're the anthology bibliography. Editors don't need to worry so much about those. Really, what editors are thinking about are going to be your edition bibliography and also bibl1. So we've got these two bibliographies. bibl1, that's our shared bibliography. Everybody uses it because it's much nicer for us to just format an entry correctly once than to have every single person need to format their bibliography entries correctly every single time. A lot of us are reusing the same sources. More than one person is using Shakespeare's First Folio, for example. So we might as well just have it once and then everybody else can call on it. bibl1 lives in the data folder. So in our LEMDO file structure, we've got LEMDO, and then we have data, and then inside of data is bibl1. It's bibl1.xml. Now, the thing about bibl1 is most people can't make changes to it. It is edited by LEMDO team members, and that's largely to make sure that we don't have a bunch of people in the same file at the same time. It does not include specific copies of a book, so if you're somebody and you're doing your collation and you're comparing a bunch of different copies of the same edition of your play, those specific copies don't go into bibl1. They stay in your own edition bibliography. But these are standard entries that you can link to in bibl1. In contrast, your own edition bibliography, that's just for your edition. It lives in, LEMDO data, texts, and then whatever your play folder or portfolio is. So H5 for Henry V or AHDM for Humorous Days Mirth. And inside of your edition portfolio, there's a folder called Crit, and that's where your bibliography lives. And it's generally going to be called EMD, and then whatever your play's abbreviation is, _ bibliography. Fairly straightforward naming protocol. You can edit this one, so you add your own entries, make changes as you see fit. You can include specific copies of books if that's something that you need to do for your edition. But for the most part, you're just going to be linking out from your bibliography to Bibl1 so that the information gets pulled in. So kind of what that looks like. This is Bibl1 online, and I'll show you in a minute how to get here. But this is what it looks like. We've got, the title and then a bibliography that is in sort of alphabetical order, broad strokes alphabetical order, but because it's such a massive file, it's not all perfect. But we have our entries to the left, and then on the right, you have the XML ID for each entry. These are important. You need them when you encode your edition bibliography. So knowing how to find these is an important skill. This is what it looks like in Oxygen. And forgive, my Oxygen is in a different color scheme than most people's. Find it easier to see these colors. So that's why it looks a little different. But it looks like this. We've got a list bibl and then a bunch of bibl elements. Each bibl element has an XML ID, and then it's got the actual entry in the text node. This is an edition bibliography. It looks very similar. It doesn't have the XML IDs on the side because our readers don't need that. This is the one from Henry V, James Murdoch's edition of it. But it looks pretty much the same. But when we look at the encoding, it looks quite different. So rather than having those, bibl elements with the XML IDs and then a whole entry inside, we literally just have a self-closing bibl with a coresp attribute, and then that links back to bibl. I'm going to switch over to this screen for a moment, just so that I can show you how to get to the bibliography if this isn't something that you've done before. Because as I said, we are linking from that edition bibliography to Bibl1. You need to be able to find those XML IDs. So if you're on the Jenkins site, our development site for LEMDO, along the top, we've got this navigation bar. To find the bibliography, just click Resources and then Bibliography. And here you go. When you're searching in here, I always recommend searching by at least two things. Search, a name, but then also search part of a title, just in case there's a spelling difference or anything like that. I always recommend just searching by two factors when you're searching our bibliography, if you don't find it at first. Inside Oxygen, it's also not too difficult to find. This is usually what your, project view will look like. So we've got LEMDO. Inside of LEMDO, we have data. And down at the bottom, underneath text, we've got bibl1.xml. Now, I usually prefer to search online, just because this is quite a lot to kind of look at. But if you prefer to search in the XML, you certainly can also check this out. You just can't make changes to it and commit those changes. Okay, so that's how you find bibl. So let's say, okay, you know how to find bibliographies. You want one for your edition. How do you get it? Well, you make one using a LEMDO template. And I strongly recommend following the template because then you just have everything that you need there already. You don't need to, kind of figure out each step. Half of it's already done for you. So to make a bibliography from a template, you're going to go at the top of your Oxygen to File, and then click on New. And you're going to get this little pop-up window. It says Choose a File Template. If you haven't recently made a bibliography, which you probably have not, it's not going to be in recently used. You'll have to scroll down into Framework Templates, where you will find LEMDO. It's probably right at the top. Inside of there, there's one called Edition Bibliography Template. Click on that. And then you're going to update this information. So there's not that little bar there before you click on it. Once you've clicked on it, there's this little bar there and it says save as. And this gives the pathway and file name for you to save. So you don't need to change the name later on. Quick tip to make that part of it easier so you don't need to update as much. Before you even click File New, just click on your crit folder and it will automatically populate this up to crit. And then all you have to worry about is changing the name so that it's, follows that protocol, EMD, followed by your play abbreviation, an underscore, and then the word bibliography. Once you have that in there, you can just click create, and there you go, you have a file. The nice thing about our LEMDO template files is that they are very well documented or commented, I suppose. There's instructions all the way through. And so all of this green commented out material is instructions, what to do, where to find documentation about this, what you should call your file, everything like that. It's already in there. You can just follow along and you should be golden. Okay, and then you have a file. You click save and add it as you would typically add a file. So now you've got a bibliography file. Now what? Well, you want to encode it. There are two pieces that we'll talk about. We're going to talk briefly about the TEI header and then more in depth about the body. In the TEI header, we've got metadata and our categories. And I'm just going to focus in on a couple of key pieces. The first one is the title statement. This is right at the top of your file, and it's a title statement element. It's going to have a title element inside, type equals main. That's name of your play, bibliography. Fairly straightforward. And then you're going to have at least one RESP statement. The first RESP statement is going to be for you, almost certainly, and you get a credit as compiler of the bibliography. So inside your RESP statement, there's going to be a RESP element, has ref equals RESP : EDT underscore comp. And that's what we use to say this is the compiler of a bibliography. In that text node, you'll say compiler. And then, sorry, my cat has gotten into the recycling, so is kicking a can around right behind me. Thank you, Soppel. So you're the compiler. And then right underneath that, you should have a purse name element. And that purse name element is going to have a ref attribute as well. And then purse : whatever your XML ID is. PEEE1 is just our kind of standard default, but put in whatever yours is and then your name in the text node. There'll be some more information in the title statement, but that's really what I want to draw your attention to is that you're a compiler for this type of file. The next thing that's really important to think about with your bibliography, and you shouldn't have to touch this, but I do point it out because I think it's good to know, is that there's a profile desk in there, a profile description. And that profile description will have a text class in it. And all of your files will have a profile description with a text class in them. And there's going to be at least one cat ref. Your bibliography should only have one. Other files you might have four, you might have more. But for your bibliography, you should have one, and it should say cat, LDT, born dig, paratext, bibl somewhere in there. And this tells our processor, hey, processor, this file, it's a bibliography. Please treat it as such. Once you're done with your TEI header, you get to the body of the file, and that's in the body element. Look at how to encode that now. Again, there are a couple of key pieces here, and I've split them up into our divs. your bibliography will probably have at least 2 div elements. The first one will be for your editions collated. This looks pretty much the same as your list wit in your collation file. This is just your list of witnesses, but in your bibliography now, so that people have access to all of those in one place. All of the sources that you use for your edition. In here, we're encoding it as a list bibl. List bibl is our bibliography list. Each kind of contained bibliography gets wrapped in a list bibl. And each entry is going to have a bibl element with a core esp attribute that links back to bibl1. So when we're linking back to bibl1, this is the same as when we are, encoding our citations in a critical paratext. Our links are always going to begin with a bibl : value. Again, that says to our processor, hey processor, I want to link back to bibl1, please. And then you put the XML ID. So we also in here are going to be putting our collated bibliography or our editions collated bibliography into chronological order. So here you see I've added comments. This one is Q1, an imaginary Q1, published 1623. Then we've got something edited by Evans in 1903. And then something edited by Desamogi in 2001. And so even though Evans would come last if we were doing this alphabetically, because this is the editions collated bibliography, we're doing it chronologically instead. And it is a big important tip. Please do add human readable information in comments beside each entry. It makes it a lot easier to go back and add entries later on. Because, if you're thinking about your collations, if you find a cool new edition from 1952 down the line, you want to know where to put it easily. And if you don't have these comments that have the year, and you're just looking at these XML IDs, you're not going to know where to put them. So make it easier for yourself later on. Add a comment. Myself, in my editions collated comments, I'll put last name of the editor followed by the year, unless it's like a big important thing like Q1, F1, then I'll just put Q1 or F1. In your secondary sources, I typically put both last name and a short title, even if there's only one work by the author, just in case, again, down the line, you realize, oh, I really want to add this second thing by Barton, but I can't remember what the short title of the first thing by Barton is, and so I don't know what order they should be in. If you put them, all the information in at once, it's much easier to organize. And makes it, way easier to put this all in order at a glance. Secondary sources. So again, we've got 2 divs. The first div is going to be your editions collated. The second div is going to be your secondary sources. And this is everything else that you cite in your edition. Again, we're going to have that div. It's going to have a head that says secondary sources. And then you have your list bibl, because this is a discrete little bibliography of secondary sources. This one is organized alphabetically. So it begins with Abbott and then Baldo and then a different Baldo. And again, typically I would put the short title in there just to make it easier in case you wanted to cite a second Abbott later on. Excuse me. Okay. Is the kind of organizational structure making sense? Yeah, awesome. So let's dive deeper into bibl element. So there's kind of 2 scenarios when you're encoding your bibliography, and you're likely to come across both inside your bibliography. The first is you have entries that are already in bibl1. You're citing the Shakespeare's First Folio. We already have that in there, so you don't need to worry about encoding it all yourself. You can just use the CoreSp attribute. So when you have an entry and it is already in bibl1, you're going to use CoreSp, which stands for correspondence. And it links from your bibliography to bibl1. And again, that the value of the CoreSp attribute is going to follow the format bibl, and then whatever the target XML ID is. You can find that target XML ID in bibl1 online, like I showed you earlier, or in Oxygen. Either way you can find it. I tend to find online more manageable, but to each their own. So yeah, you can find it either place. And that's all. You've just got a self-closing bibl element with a CoreSp attribute. For entries that are not in bibl1, you've got, that kind of more niche book that you're citing, you can encode the full bibliography entry, and it just makes it a little bit easier for the LEMDO team to get your stuff all ready to go. So there are a few elements that you're going to be looking at when you're encoding a bibliography. And you can do this in your bibliography file itself, add a bibl element. Don't make it self-closing, just start adding things into the text node. We're following a slightly modified MLA7 style and have that fairly well documented with examples. But the elements that you'll be using to do this are author, which is pretty straightforward. The element just is author. And again, fairly straightforward. That's the author of the work. You're going to format your text node for the first author as surname, forename. For subsequent authors, it's going to be forename, surname. So following that MLA7. And punctuation will go outside of the closing tag, except for when there's initials, because we don't want to wrap anything in a tag that isn't actually the author. So if you have those two authors, you don't want to put the comma separating their names inside of the author tag, because comma isn't an author, right? It's just a punctuation mark. But for people who use initials, let's say I had written something and I'd done it as N Houldin, you would put the period after N inside of that author tag. And this is an example of what that looks like. If the work you're citing doesn't have an author, maybe you're citing by editor, you're going to use the editor tag instead. Same format as author, just like standard MLA 7. And you're going to add a comma ed following their name. So kind of like this, you've got an editor tag with their name, last name, comma, initials, period is inside because we're using initials here, and then comma, ed, period. Title is the next thing that you're likely to use, and I know this looks a little bit weird. If you were at Regex session, this might be slightly more familiar, but we've got a title element, and that should always have a level attribute. That level attribute is going to have one of these letters, not all of them, one of these letters as the value, A, J, M, S, or U. And the reason why having that level attribute is so important is that's what our online rendering depends on. So these are what those values are. A is for analytic. That's for anything that's published as part of a larger work. So that's your journal article, a poem, anything like that. And in our processing, our processor adds quotation marks. So you don't need to add those. That happens whenever you have that title level equals A, which is why it's so important to have that level put in correctly. I believe everything else renders just italicized. We have J for journal. That includes magazines, newspapers, academic journals. M is for monograph. Those are your distinct publications. So a play is title level equals M, a book title level equals M, and so on. Series is level equals S. It's for any collections. And then we also have U for unpublished. So dissertations, theses, anything like that. That's a title level equals U for unpublished. Now, you don't need to have all of those perfectly memorized, because when you're working in Oxygen and you wrap something in title, you add that space and you click the letter L, level's going to come up as an option. Select that, and it's going to give you a drop down that gives you A, J, M, S, U. If you scroll down through those using your up and down arrows, when you have each one selected, it will give you the definition. So if you don't have these memorized today, not to worry. Oxygen's there to help you. It will give you the definitions as you go through that list in there. It won't tell you how it renders, but you can trust that it's going to render how LEMDO wants it to render. After your title, you might have some other information depending on the type of work, but typically it won't be wrapped in anything other than editors, which you already know how to encode, until you get to publication place or pub place element. We wrap, the place where the work was published in pub place. Hopefully that makes sense. Typically the city. If it was published in more than one place, give each place a new pub place element. So each city, if it's London and New York, London gets a pub place element, New York gets a pub place element, and doesn't need to be wrapped in anything. And then typically following MLA style, we're going to follow that closing tag with a colon, because afterwards we get our publisher element. And this is, the publisher of the book, or for our old books, we'll sometimes have the printer, the bookseller in there. But they can also just be wrapped in publisher is what we typically do. And we follow that closing tag typically with a comma, because after that we have a date. And the date is just the year of publication. Now, you may or may not have any identifier values. Our identifiers are our IDNO elements, IDNO. And these are just, again, identifiers, and it should have a type attribute. Now, we have a lot of values for type on IDNO, but these are the ones that you're most likely to see in bibliography context, at least. So we've got deep, which is for the database of early English playbooks. So if you have the deep number, that gets wrapped in IDNO. And then you have the deep value. DOI, that's your standard DOI. ESTC is for the English short title catalog, which, is still down, but we do have the print probability online that you can get the ESTC number if you so choose. We can create links using these. So if you have correctly encoded it and you've got that IDNO and your type equals ESTC, it does make a link on our bibliography on the website. For ESTC, it obviously doesn't work currently, but for other ones, it does work, which is pretty cool. You don't need to put it in the URL. You can just put in that identifying number, and our processor does the work for you. We have Greg for Greg numbers from Bibliography of English Printed Drama. LEMI for Lexicons of Early Modern English. OCLC, that links back to WorldCat. STC is our short title catalog. URI, that's the same as URL. That's, the website URL. Wiggins, that's, referring to the numbers from British drama, 1533 through 1642. Heads up, that one's going to be changing soon. We're going to change it, the value to Brit Drama, and that matches with what the new version of Deep has. So we'll kind of be standardizing with them. We've got Wing for the Wing Short Title Catalog, and then WSB for the World Shakespeare Bibliography. So there are lots of identifiers that you can use. You don't have to use all of them. In most cases, you will not use all of them. In most cases, you won't use any really, but you can use them for some of your works. So what that actually looks like is this. So we've got a list bibl, because this is a bibliography. This is an imaginary bibliography for an edition that doesn't exist. I just grabbed a bunch of examples that I thought were decent. So each entry is wrapped in bibl. And because we're imagining this is an edition bibliography, they don't have XML IDs. And the reason is we need to move these into bibl1, into our shared bibliography, just in case somebody else wants to cite them later on. And in bibl1, we'll give them the XML ID. This bibliography, this edition bibliography, will need to change down the road to link to bibl1 instead of having each entry encoded fully here. And so this is just the first phase, essentially. So no XML ID needed. That will be assigned later. We do have our author. Here we go. And you've got last name, comma, first name. And then outside of the closing tag, we have that period. Then we have a title. This is a monograph. So it's got a level equals M, 100 Years War, England and France at War, period. Our pub place is Cambridge. Then we have our colon because we've got our publisher afterwards, Cambridge University Press. And you might notice we've put University Press, not UP. We have space, might as well use it. No, we do expand the entirety of UP into University Press. And then our comma, and then a date. And that's the end of our bibl element. This one, we've got an editor rather than an author. So we've got that comma ed after the editor tag. Then we have a title, and you'll notice there's a title inside the title because Henry V is part of that. And that's totally fine. You can have a title inside of a title. You can also have a quote inside of a title. We've got a period after that, and then we have our series, the Shakespeare Folios, and that's title level equals S. Again, we have our pub place, which is London, a colon, and then our publisher, comma, and then the date. After that, we've got an idno. And so in our text, we put what the idno is. This one's a WSB space, and then our idno with the type attribute, and then whatever that value is in there. Here it's AAF988. Here again, we've got that author. This one's an analytic. This one is a journal article. And again, we've got a quote inside of that title. It's totally fine. Our processor will deal with that. It will add all the quotation marks that are appropriate for a title that includes a quote in there. Then we've got our journal name. So we've got title level equals J. That's Shakespeare Studies. The number is 23. Our date is inside of parentheses, which is our standard with MLA 7, a colon, and then our page range. Now, page range, this mark here, not a hyphen, that's an N dash. That's what we use for number ranges. It's also the same for date ranges. If you're not sure how to get an N dash when you're encoding in Oxygen, that's fine, don't worry. Just Control Shift Space, and that will give you a drop-down list of all of our special characters, which includes N dash and M dash, and a bunch of others, but those are the ones that I most frequently use. I don't think there's anything else too exciting in here. We've got another idno, also WSB, and another one down here, also WSB. So again, note on XML-IDs. When you're encoding, you've got that entry. It wasn't in bibl1. You checked a couple of times to make sure. And so you've encoded it fully in your edition bibliography. You don't need to add that XML-ID. A LEMDO team member will do that. Once you have finished doing all of this work and encoding the things that you need to, you'll send an email, probably to me, lemdopm@uvic.ca, and say, hey, Navarra, I've finished encoding my bibliography. Can somebody please add it to bibl1? And I will say, yes, we can. And either myself or one of the RAs will go in and do that. And when you've got it encoded like this and you've gone through and done it correctly, it makes it so much easier and quicker for us. So thank you for doing that. But we're usually able to get it done fairly quickly, depending on the size of your bibliography. And we'll go in and we'll move them into bibl1, and we will add an XML-ID for every entry. And then we will give you back those XML-IDs so that your bibliography can be turned into this beautiful thing. You don't need the space between each one. I just wanted it to be easier to see for a presentation. But you get rid of all that text node. Instead, you just add the core ESP attribute in, your equals, and then that bibl colon and whatever the XML-ID is. Then you can add in, your comment with the last name of the author or editor, and then a short title, just then it's easy to remember exactly what each of these things means, because just the bibl core ESP is not very human readable. And by the end, it looks so beautiful. A nicely encoded bibliography makes me so happy. I will pause if there are any questions right now. Okay, I don't see
Navarra, I think I know the answer to this, but once you all have done the adding of our entries and created XML IDs, is that something that we then have to go back and kind of like edit our own original to add those XML IDs? Like I feel like I probably should know that already, but I'm not sure.
So it kind of depends on how you give it to us, and how much you're working in the bibliography still, if at all. Sometimes it's quicker for us to just go in and add the XML IDs ourselves, or add those core ESP attributes ourselves. Sometimes it makes more sense to put the XML IDs in there and then let you get rid of the extra bits. But usually we'll say, please stay out of your file for half an hour while I put the core ESP attributes in.
Okay.
And then, you might need to edit things or change things up. Feel free to do that. But yeah, we'll usually put the XML IDs back in.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
If you've given us your bibliography in a different format, let's say you did this in Word instead, we'll just give you the XML IDs back usually. But if you've encoded it like that, it's so easy to just change it over to the core ESP. It's very quick, which is one of the benefits of doing it that way.
Great. Thanks, Navarra.
Yeah, may I jump in?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like to evaporate my thoughts in XML. So I bypass Word altogether. And when I'm doing my research for the editions I'm working on, I'm actually just typing the bibliography entries directly into a bibl element, knowing that later on I'll go back and make an XML ID for myself or ask the team member to do it. Yeah, so don't be afraid to use your own edition bibliography file as a kind of a drafting space. It's not available to the public. It is visible by other people working in the LEMDO repository, but we know
so you're just
you can
working
use
right
it as a place to
Oxygen.
collect information.
Yeah, you're just collecting right in Oxygen as you go.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
And bibliographies are a really nice place. Like if you're newer to working in XML, newer to working in Oxygen, I find bibliographies are a really good place to start, because you've got a very predictable format. And you can just have, a list bibl with bibl elements and just text in there and then come back and encode them later. But it's a nice place to kind of start getting more comfortable doing that work in Oxygen and following that file structure in Oxygen. So if you're thinking, oh, I'd like to start making the switch, so then, I don't have to worry about this twice, once in Word, once in Oxygen. I can just do it once straight in Oxygen. Yeah, bibliography, I think, is a really nice place to start doing that.
And if you do, it saves us tons of time and we can help you down the road with more complicated things.
Yeah.
Let me add 3 more points. We don't know if the ESTC is ever going to come back online.
Yeah.
The ESTC number remains a useful identifier. We will probably repoint those links to the Print and Probability Network's relaunch of the ESTC. If that may end up becoming the one we all use for the foreseeable future, we can take those links away or repoint them at any time. So it's still worth putting the ESTC number in if you can. Second point, if you see any mistakes when you're browsing through the Bibl1 output on the LEMDO development site, do let us know. It does happen, and we're kind of relying on this crowd proofreading effort. That's another benefit of having this shared bibliography, that everybody who's using it and tapping into it is effectively proofreading it as they go. And the last point is that Bibl1 file is never actually published on a public-facing website. It's strictly an internal document. So the fact that it's not perfectly alphabetical doesn't matter. Over time, it's going to become an exhaustive enumerative bibliography of sources on early modern drama, at which point we might want to pull that data into some kind of public-facing resource. But we'll keep working on our editions and letting it grow until we decide what to do with it.
Thanks, Janelle. Okay. So I'm gonna do a quick recap and then leave a couple of minutes for any more questions that kind of spring up. So first one we talked about today is that Bibl1 is a shared bibliography that you can access either on our Jenkins site or in Oxygen in LEMDO data /bibl XML or bibl1.xml. Your edition bibliography lives in your, play portfolio in the crit folder. And it's going to be named EMD, then whatever your play abbreviation is, _bibliography. Your edition bibliography should link to Bibl1, with the exception of if you've got any specific copies in there. At which point that will stay as, a Bibl entry with the text node in your edition bibliography. We talked about creating a bibliography file using our LEMDO template. You want to make sure you are listed as a compiler in a RESP statement, and that there's a catref element that includes a target that has that LDT born dig paratext bibl value, because that's what makes our processor do what we want it to do. You're going to have at least 2 div elements, or you should have at least 2 div elements. One will be for your editions collated, which is organized chronologically, and then one for your secondary sources, which is organized alphabetically. And then each of those divs should have a list bibl, and that's the actual, bibliography in that div. Each entry, you're going to have a bibl element. If your entry is already in Bibl1, just use the cresp attribute to link back to that XML ID, and then add a comment providing human readable information. So you've got that format bibl coresp equals bibl : and then that XML ID, and then whatever your comment is, typically surname, short title. If whatever your entry is not in Bibl1 yet, encode each entry using the appropriate elements. Once you're done, let us know, send me that email, and we'll add them to Bibl1 and assign those XML IDs. We have some pretty good resources for bibliographies. I believe they all live in chapter 10 of our documentation. We have an introduction to bibliographies and citation, note on encode or on preparing your edition bibliography. So what information do you need to have for each of your entries to have, a bibliography entry that fits our formatting requirements? How to encode bibliographies, and that includes information on those title levels. And then your bibliography entry examples. That's probably my favorite piece of documentation that I go back to most frequently. I come from the history world as a student, and so my brain's always Chicago mode. I always need that refresher. What am I doing in this MLA 7? This tells you exactly what we want. And then we've got curate edition bibliography as well. A few acknowledgements before we move on to questions. Thank you to the Canada's Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council for funding this webinar series. Thanks to me for slide design. Thanks to Martin Holmes for our TEI customization for LEMDO, and to HCMC for our site design and hosting. I'll stop sharing my screen for a second and open up the floor to questions once more. Okay. If there are none, I'll say thank you for coming. It's very nice to see you. I hope we'll see you at our next webinar next month. And yeah, hope you have a good day.